Welcome back to Explorer. I want to thank you for watching. Since the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, a lot of African countries have been under enormous pressure. For example, South Africa in particular, one of the regional powerhouses in the region, has become under huge pressure alongside other countries around the region to take sides with regards to the Ukrainian war, a war actually that they do not know anything about. However, if you've heard about Jeffrey Sahs, he's an American economist, academic public policy analyst, and a former director of the Earth Institute at the Columbia University. He also doubles and holds a title of university professor. He is known for his work on sustainable development, economic development, and the fight to end poverty. He actually sees the war in Ukraine from a different perspective. Now, most African countries are struggling to take position. South Africa has adjusted itself to be on a non-aligned. The non-aligned position, according to President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, that it does not favor Russia nor other countries. However, South Africa has pushed for a mutual discussion to resolve this conflict in peace. Jeffrey Sahs, on the other hand, actually looked into that as a result of a lot of provocative policies that has caused a lot of division. In an interview with CNN's veteran journalist, Richard Quest, Mr. Sach actually dived into some specifics, elaborating onto his own perspective with regards to the outcome of the Ukrainian war. It looked into some basics and talked about why there's a lot of division which has been caused in a number of ways, according to him, based on the divided policies and also the policies of provocation. Let's listen to what he has to say, and we will join you again on the other side.
With me, the Columbia University professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development, author of the book The Price of Civilization. Jeffrey, I read your views on this, and you certainly have some transparent views in terms of how NATO's expansion has taken place, and in your view. But now we are where we are, and it's a question of getting out of this before any more lives are lost, or what long-term economic damage done.
Well, Jay Powell has it exactly right. The world is falling into fragmented groups, and there will be extraordinarily high costs from this. The sanctions that the United States and Europe have put on have done a tremendous damage to Europe and the United States and to much of the rest of the world. And we're feeling the brunt of now a strong stagflation, which was the main topic facing the central bank leaders that were in Sintra, Portugal. This is likely a hard landing in much of the world coming up in the next months. I think that our foreign policy strategy, both towards China and towards Russia, has been provocative and divisive for a number of years. This didn't just start now. There was already the U.S. trade wars on China, and then the technology wars, the financial sanctions, and all the rest. We've divided the world, and now we're paying a strong, heavy cost for that.
Right, but let's put blame where blame lies, surely. Whatever NATO's expansion may have been about, or in the 1990s, etc., it doesn't justify, and I see your views, that what Putin did in Ukraine, and there had to be a strong response to that, surely.
Of course, but there should have been negotiation in 2021 when Putin said NATO should not expand to Ukraine and Georgia. I would have been the first one to say absolutely correct. Why do something so provocative, something akin to the Crimean War back in 1853? We shouldn't be having a Black Sea confrontation. So we should have been prudent. Putin said last year, negotiate over the non-enlargement of NATO. Biden said, absolutely not. That's off the table. We are going to expand. We're committed to having NATO not only in Ukraine, but all the way across to the eastern edge of the Black Sea in Georgia. This is a huge expansion of NATO. NATO was a defensive alliance of Western Europe against the Soviet Union, a defensive alliance against a country that doesn't exist. And yet we said it will continue to expand all the way to the eastern edge of the Black Sea. And Russia kept saying, No, for 30 years, I was there at the beginning when this discussion started. Russia was saying, don't do that. Gorbachev was saying, don't do that. Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the German foreign minister
Jeffrey,
in 1990, said, don't worry, we won't move 1 inch. Now, this isn't to say that this isn't to say that that is what started the war. The war was started by Putin. But the United States has been provocative also towards China. And my point, Richard, is we're paying a heavy economic cost. That cost is likely to rise. NATO today is 12.2% of the world population.
Jeffrey, let me jump in here.
Sure,
Jeffrey.
Sure.
Now, you heard it pretty clear there. Africa did not play any particular role, but the geopolitics in the region is greatly affecting a lot of decision-making process within the continent. You do have the United States on the ground, you have Russia on the ground, you have Ukraine. Dmitry Kuleba recently visited Africa. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov is always in the continent, and the United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken have been in the region. Now, Africans are the ones who are struggling to adjust. There's high food prices, you have increased fuel cost for people to move around, as we heard from an expert, Joseph Sani, recently in one of our videos. So you begin to see that somehow the Cold War has been exported into the continent, and Africa is struggling to adjust for a war that they know nothing about. However, since Africa is part of the world, these things will continue to happen. African leaders should approach the war in Ukraine, like the Kenyan leader has clearly mentioned, that they should go through the UN Charter, and South Africa has taken a non-aligned stand. Now, more into that conversation between veteran journalist Richard Quest and also Jeffrey Sachs on the other side. Let's listen to the last part of the conversation.
Surely you can't deny now, however right that your argument might or might not be, and I'm sure there'll be people who will take issue with it, but you couldn't deny Sweden and Finland now the right to have the protection of the NATO umbrella, having seen what Putin can do. Bearing in mind, he told us straight to our faces, I have no intention of invading Ukraine, up to the very moment that the tanks went over the border.
What is absolutely remarkable is that at the end of March, negotiations were advancing for a neutral Ukraine and for an end of the war. And then Ukraine walked away from the negotiating table at the end of March. And the reason is that the UK and the US pressed them. You can win on the battlefield. You don't have to negotiate non-enlargement of NATO. This was a big mistake. My point is simply that we need this war to end with Russia leaving Ukraine and NATO saying we're not going to fill in the void. Ukraine is going to be neutral. And this is how we could also save the world economy as well as saving Ukraine. It's very straightforward. Russia needs to leave, but the United States doesn't need to fill in afterwards. That's the basic point. We need a buffer.
Right. We'll talk more about it. Jeffrey, I'm grateful to have you tonight. Thank you, sir, always.
If you look at the vote at the United Nations, a number of African countries either abstained, some criticized the war, and some were against, and some actually condemned the war. Someone like the president of Kenya have actually expressed his vision, looking at the reason why countries to stick with the UN Charter. However, most countries are under pressure. The impact of the Ukrainian war is evident in the continent of Africa, despite them not being concerned or not being at the center of the cause of the war. As what you've heard from Mr. Jeffrey Sahs, let us know what you think with regards to Jeffrey Sahs' perspective, looking at the Russian-Ukrainian war and why African countries should focus and fight for their own interest and actually make a clear position, like what we've heard from the president of Kenya and that of South Africa. I want to thank you for watching. Hopefully we've informed you with different perspectives with regards to the Ukrainian war with Russia and why African countries must stick to their position and make their position pretty clear so the world should know where they stand. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. If you are new to this channel, we encourage you to check some of our informative videos on this YouTube channel. Have a good day. Bye bye.